It's not easy butchering people. It's hard work. You know, there's a lot more like me. We're talking to serial killers. Serial killers! New terminology. Are criminals born, or are they formed? How do we get ahead of crazy if we don't know how crazy thinks? It's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission. Welcome to the Hollow9ine Mindhunter podcast. Okay, this will be the first official record of the Hollow9ine Network Incorporated's Behavioral Sciences Studies Group, and we are initially tasked with coverage of the Netflix original series Mindhunter, or as you will hear me, the director of the team, David Klone, of the Hollow9ine Network, referring to it as the Season 2 of True Detective we all wish we actually had. Joining me tonight on this task force, all the way from, I don't know, at this point, it's been so many incarnations of 10 Minutes in Purgatory, it's probably more like 2 hours in Purgatory, but all the way from that podcast, Miss Jennifer Earp, thank you for joining us tonight.
Of course, I'm very excited about this.
All the way from Saloon 7 Studios and the better half of, or one half of the Grit and Grace show, our good friend, Mr. CJ Ripka, also known as Barry Muldoon of Tangent City.
Hello, everybody.
And rounding out the round table tonight, you've heard him as well on Tangent City, the, I guess, non-intentional at first, but now the first of many big bads to come. Dr. Paulson himself, Mr. T.W. Brown, how are you doing, sir?
Outstanding.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this journey into the show that every time I get somebody to watch it, they're like, holy shit, how did I not know about this? And that's exactly how I felt when I first saw the trailer on Netflix. You know, like you sign on and sometimes they throw a trailer at you right away, and I was just like, what the hell is this? And the last time I felt that was Stranger Things, so I kind of felt immediately this was something that needed attention. Let's go around the table real quick. What was everyone's initial impression when, like, maybe you had just seen the trailer, and then let's say when you got into the first 2 or 3 episodes there and kind of were feeling your way through the season? And Jennifer, why don't we start with you?
Great. Awesome. Okay, so I've always loved just like the serial killer, you know, ethos, whatever you want to call it, genre. I don't really want it. It's not really a genre, but it could be.
It's becoming
Criminal
one.
Minds.
Yeah,
and
it's
all
definitely
that
becoming one.
Yeah. But then when was it Becoming a Murderer was on Netflix?
Making a Murderer.
Was that this? Making a Murderer. Thank you. That I got huge into that. It actually got me back on Twitter. That show actually got me back on Twitter. So like when this Mindhunter came out, I saw the trailer and I was like, yes, it's like the beginning of the behavioral sciences. Yes, I want in on that. So I think I watched the first episode and then got my wife to watch all of it with me, and we were just hooked, like right off the bat. So good.
It's the cousin you never knew you needed to have come visit a lot, right? It's
of course
a world where they didn't have the even concept of serial killers. It's kind of a time warp, you know?
Yeah, and thinking about how like the police didn't think that psychology was a thing they needed to think about. Like that was so crazy to think about back then.
Yeah, it's such a different time, and even now, like, we can think of times that we've all experienced in our lifetime and how things are so different now. I love period pieces like this, though, so definitely the time travel aspect I found awesome. Mr. Ripka, what about you? First impressions?
First of all, I didn't even know this show existed until you had put something out about Mindhunter, doing a Mindhunters show. And so I went and I binge watched like the first 6 episodes, like right then. I mean, I didn't even realize that 6 episodes had gone by. I just got sucked into it so quick. And by the time I got to 6, and well, actually I went through the entire season, and this is the first time, even Stranger Things, I love that show. But this is the first time on any series I was able to go right back to episode 1 and just start all over. And you catch something new each time you watch it. The fourth time now that I've watched episodes 1, 2, and 3 to get ready for the show, I was still finding new things coming out of those episodes that I had missed or overlooked or whatever it was. So, it's definitely something that spoke to me. The show spoke to me. The genre or the era. I've always been fascinated by I would say the adolescent era of the FBI. And I would say that this is what I would call the adolescent era of the FBI. It's shortly after Hoover died. So there's not a whole lot. It's in puberty right now. And it's a great place to be with the show.
And Mr. Brown.
I was trading shows with a friend of mine and telling them what I was watching, and they threw that title at me. And so, since it was one of the weekends that the wife and I didn't really have anything lined up, we were like, oh, okay, well, we'll give that a shot. And I wasn't really sure I was going to be into it because I'm just not a police show kind of guy. It just doesn't do it for me. There have been very few that have worked for me. And we kept watching and watching and watching. And to give you an idea, I mean, we get up around 2 or 3 in the morning here in this house. So bedtime is usually around 7 or 8.
Hey, man, we all have our schedules.
Oh, yeah. We were up past midnight watching. I mean, we kept going and going. And a lot of times if we're watching a show, one of us will start to nod off and wake the other one up. And neither one of us were nodding off during the show. I mean, we were both just hooked. And so that doesn't happen often.
So for the folks who watched as couples, did this one rank on the if you Netflix cheat on me with this, I will fucking murder you in your sleep. I will be mind hunted after this.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely did.
That's hilarious. I remember Breaking Bad Netflix cheating on somebody with that show, and that was the when I first realized that it was such a thing. I was like, oh shit. So for all the single folks out there, this is definitely one you don't have to worry about that shit with. You could just stay up and not even sleep, go to work the next day and just be like fucked up in the head from all the David Fincher directing the first 2 hours. For all the people who don't immediately have the hairs on the back of their neck stand up at that mention, we're talking Seven, we're talking Fight Club, we're talking Zodiac, and based on a book, but it's Fincher's the kind of guy. I mean, Fight Club was based on a novel, and it's like if you read the novel, you get one experience, but Fincher has always got his stamp, his fingerprints all over. He's like Nolan, you know what I mean? You know when you're watching a Fincher project, you know when you're watching a Nolan project. I think, maybe it was even a little unfair of me to say True Detective so early in the show, because I feel like that's actually a thought I just had today for the first time. So as I got ready to watch episodes 1, 2, and 3 back to back, I watched True Detective season 1, episode 1 before them. Because I didn't really think about it until now. Maybe that's one of the reasons I gravitated towards this show so much, because I loved True Detective. Are there other shows that come to mind before we start getting into the sort of nitty-gritty of the first episode that maybe this show is a successor to, that were maybe set up? I mean, definitely Fincher's movies. You can feel Zodiac all over this for sure. The tone, the look, the style, the feel of it. But are we in an era where serial killer is a genre? What other kind of TV shows rank up there with you guys for this kind of thing?
I think for this one, it really sort of sets its own tone, because you're talking about the Nixon era conservatism that was really prevalent in law enforcement, where there was so much exclusion and a real good old boys network. And that's not really popular to talk about in a lot of things, because it does paint a bad light, but they didn't shy away from it. I mean, they had people who were dead set in their beliefs and their opinions, and it altered the way that they would run an investigation, and this really sort of peels that nasty scab off. So I think it really sets its own tone to go towards more of a realistic encapsulation of what our history was like, and taking the law enforcement aspect and saying, this is how we did things, and we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, that's admission of ignorance, and nobody likes to do that.
Well, and also I think. Oh, go ahead, CJ.
One of the things that fascinated me so much about this, it wasn't even the crime aspect so much. It wasn't the law enforcement aspect. It was the sciences aspect. So when I look at it from that, I mean, there's so much here that's playing a part, like the sciences, the law enforcement. So you're going to have a bunch of different people gravitate towards something like that. Well, the only other show that I can think of which really kind of dove into the sciences this way, it doesn't remind me of it, but this is almost like a prequel to what comes later on in the 2000s and stuff like that. And that's that show Lie to Me, where he was using micro expressions to catch criminals.
Yeah.
And Tim Roth too, because it was Tim Roth.
Tim Roth. Yeah.
I love it.
You're kind of at the beginning of the sciences, and that show was more like the climax or the epic. This is where the sciences led to.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I was going to say is that I think the strangest thing for me is that it's such a crime show, but there's literally so little violence in it. It's just all talking.
Yeah.
But it's so you're just on the edge of your seat the whole time with just people talking to each other. That's all that's happening.
It's
real world.
Yeah, it's the Tarantino effect, but with David Fincher meticulousness. I mean, you almost feel like, in a lot of the first episode, we see Holden teaching classes, and you can kind of get that feeling of one of the people in the classes who's like, okay, for 2 seconds this was cool, then I realized you were still talking. Jesus, dude. You take monotone to a new level.
Yes.
But that comes after what I have to say to me is one of the most epic cold opens of a new show for me. First sequence of episode 1, where Holden comes in, and it's the perfect setup, the perfect visual analogy for what this show is going to be. The old brute force style of an older don't tell me how to do my job style cop with a bullhorn literally threatening the guy, don't make me come in there, we're gonna fucking come in there, and they're like, dude, the guy's already got a shotgun to people's heads, what the fuck is the matter with you? And it becomes hold on, let's just try and get on his level and talk to him like a human. What were your sort of feelings when this sequence concluded itself? Because that was definitely a feat of CG unlike any I've seen on any other networks, really. I felt like Netflix really has been putting a stake in the ground with being balls out with stuff like this. Whoa, that was epic.
It was so intense that I literally, that was not the ending I was thinking for. I was like, okay, they're just gonna it's gonna be happy and they're gonna get him out of this. And then the ending of that cold open, I was just it made me expect that for the rest of the season. And it never, that was just the high point. And then it just it just stayed just a little bit lower, but the whole time, but it was just what is happening? Is this gonna happen again?
Yeah.
It was insane. It was so good.
But that opening sequence set the stage for all the opening sequence in the series. So pay attention to that.
Oh
my
Sure.
God.
They really built a good beginning and ending formula for each episode. I mean, they really, you could take just the beginning and endings and watch those and have it be its own little, its own little thing. And I that opening sequence, for me, it's like walking into somebody's house as a guest and getting slapped in the face. It's the rest of the night you're going to be watching to see what's coming next. I mean, it was all right, you have my attention now.
I jumped. I jumped. I'm like, okay, this guy, now he's going to hold the thing to his head and he's going to threaten to kill himself if he doesn't get to talk to his wife. No, he doesn't threaten anything. He just, boom, I jumped.
Yeah. And I think it was even from the sound effect of the gunshot was so prominent. The sound design in the show is and I think this is why I think people like Fincher and Nolan have to be compared to each other all the time, because they're the ones who will take that time to design the subtleness that really is subconsciously completing this world for us. Because you kind of know that you're going to be in a universe after that sequence ends. You know what I mean? You are pulled into the whole feel of it's this guy trying to shine a different kind of light. There's all these other lights already behind him. There's already this established protocol taking place, and he's just trying to edge in with something new. And unless you have full committal, I think that's what I was left with, is that it's still going to wind up with not the not the best of results, not the best potential results you could get. I mean, I think in a regular procedural show, they would have captured that guy, and this would become case one of the sort of criminal mind that they're dissecting. And what it did was, this was the inciting incident that's literally put him on a journey, because after this, they put him on the road teaching classes, right? And he even referred to it as being put out to pasture.
Not quite. If you really pay attention to what happened there, though, it was an example of success versus failure in the mind of the FBI. In that next sequence, you hear how he's talking to the chief, and he literally says, "Hey, this is a success. We didn't lose any hostages." But you can tell he doesn't feel that. And that sound effect that you're talking about, that shotgun blast, it actually comes up 3 more times in the show, and you can see his reaction to that effect. 2 of them are shotgun blasts. 1 of them is a backfire. So you start paying attention to those little nuances and how that affected him, and why he started going towards the backroom boys side of the house versus the negotiator side of the house. It really kind of sucks you in pretty deep.
So you get a little light on PTSD before we had a name for it.
Right. Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, there weren't names for a lot of the things they discover. There wasn't even the name serial killer. I mean, that in itself is amazing, that there was a time that wasn't a term. And I love how the rest of the next parts of the episode are all very much like that. They're like these coincidence crossroads that are really these incidents that keep pushing him further along the journey. You know, it's like he's teaching a class, and as he's walking out of his class, he hears the end of another class, and it's this other professor who's talking about the things that he has been picking up on. You know, I mean, like you were saying, CJ, where the chief kind of was like, "Hey, look, you know, you did the best you could. This is what we go for. You know, just the bad guy died. You did nothing wrong, but go teach classes. We're going to keep you off the road for a little while, or off the front lines for a little while." And he was the one who was in that meeting trying to say, like, look, that guy he thought he was invisible. He was talking to people that weren't there. There's something about that we need to start looking at. And they still had him, you know, not even delving into that. And here's this other guy whose classroom is full of people, like standing room only. And he's talking about Son of Sam. He's just like, it's like, why the fuck does he get the cool assignment? You know what I mean? Like, that's what I've been seeing that firsthand. I had the next Son of Sam on that porch, and he blew his head off. We don't get any of the benefit of this. But if he didn't go out for the beer with him, then he wouldn't have met the girl that he winds up being his girlfriend either. So it's like there's all these things that are all these little connection points that probably fall into the formula, but I find them awesome. Those are the things that I love about the way a journey like this goes.
Well, and I love how smart he is. Yeah, and I love how smart he is about, you know, there's this group of people that became prevalent around that time, that they were just strangers killing strangers. Like, that's what he was like. He was like, why is this happening? Like, yeah, we know that lovers kill each other, and we know that next door neighbors get in fights and squabbles and they kill each other, but why is this random person just walking up to a car and killing people? Like, why is this happening? And nobody's questioning it. Like, that's the kind of like inventiveness that made this so great. Because he's like, let's take this beyond and see why this is happening. That's what I loved about it.
Now, do we get the feeling like that this world legitimately didn't have this kind of phenomenon happening, or is it that it wasn't being labeled and it was just being written off as like, oh, that just falls under this thing we would call crazy, you know, all across the board?
Yeah.
I think it's like when you talk about a red car and all of a sudden that's all you see are red cars. You know, I mean, and I think what happened was they weren't looking for this before. They weren't seeing this because nobody could imagine or envision people going off on this level. But once they started finding it, they started realizing we've got a system full of these people. We just didn't have a name for him, because you remember the big dude that they do a lot of interviews with later on. And so, you know, I mean, this stuff was happening. We just didn't have names for it then.
Yeah.
Because I felt. Oh, I'm sorry, CJ. Go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off.
I was going to say the science of psychology. I mean, it had been around for over 100 years at this point. However, this is the same science though that has been. It's like what we're going through with the computer generation. It was new, but yet it's constantly evolving, and they're finding out new things all the time. So really the FBI in their position is, well, this isn't a proven science. We're not going to really put a whole lot of stake in it. And up to that point, when they're dealing with the murderers that the FBI are dealing with are people like Machine Gun Kelly and Bonnie and Clyde and the gangster type killers that are, it's pretty easy to label them. They are just pissed off, frenzied killers. And that's what they put all these people on. And when we start seeing the 60s and the effect that things like the Vietnam War had on people, now we're starting to see a whole different mentality and a whole different mindset. A lot of these serial killers, if you look at them, they had so many things that kind of led up to it. Whether some of them, now I'm not talking about the ones specifically on the show, but they found cases where people had tried to get into the military because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to go and kill people. But they get put them away, and then later on, the FBI is chasing them down and arresting them for committing murder here in the United States. So all this kind of plays it together, and it kind of, into what the FBI's thinking is. It's like, oh no, that's people aren't sick yet. They're still. It's still only the gangsters that are doing it.
Yeah, it was very 50s. Everything is the quintessential ideal American vision, American dream was like still kind of held over at that time period. I mean, part of me in rewatching this, because I did rewatch the entire season right before I was like seriously like, okay, posting, let's get this thing on the road. People are downloading us and we don't have enough content out there for them yet. So listeners at home, this one's for you. Everyone's for you. That's what the Hollow9ine Network's all about. But I kind of started to get this feeling, and maybe this is where the sort of similarity yet also difference between True Detective is. I mean, if you wanted to make a case, if there was a conspiracy theory kind of mindset looking at this, if we are talking about a period where maybe this was happening, but it just wasn't prevalent enough to even be a blip on the radar, what if it really wasn't happening and it just kind of, this is the beginning of the phenomenon? That's where someone would come in and say, well, what kind of new medications were hitting the market at this time period? Chris already brought up the Vietnam War playing into the sort of changing of the psychology of the country. I mean, these days we would immediately be looking at the medications and what kind of pollutants are coming out of car fuels. There would have been this whole sort of other way.
Video games.
Which way they didn't have yet, right? So I mean, but there had to be something that was kind of filling that void at the time that we didn't realize. I mean, one of the things I thought that was super telling, and one of the things that really kind of makes this show a little on what I would call the smart side. Like, I could see some people maybe being a little taken aback by how much you have to pay attention and how much you have to kind of really connect dots. But when they're watching Dog Day Afternoon and you see the varied responses of people, when Holden's watching it with Debbie, after he meets Debbie, which we kind of skipped over. We should talk about his meeting Debbie. But when he's watching it with Debbie and how they have one sort of response and dialogue about it, and then when the other students in his class are watching it and how they're more like laughing at it and not taking it seriously, and even Chris Sarandon's performance in there, the way he was describing a psychologist telling him that he was a woman trapped in a man's body. I mean, at that time they didn't even have the idea of like something like trans, which now looking at it through 2018 eyes, you're like, holy shit, talk about how things are going on behind the scenes that people can't even conceive of how to understand. I think this show is a brilliant time capsule for all that kind of stuff. But do we feel like there's any possibility that this is also maybe them saying, yeah, around this time the country literally started going crazy, like people just started killing strangers?
I think we like to do that with just about anything. I also think there's a lot to be said about how once something gets its spot in the public eye, we brighten it up so much that, I mean, the copycat thing is a real event. I mean, people go, that's how I'm going to get famous. and it pushes. And so you have the Manson incident, and now people are saying, hey, if I do some really violent killing, I'm going to be a name, and they're going to have TV shows and books about me. Watergate pretty much ruined politicians' lives, from what they had, because they all of a sudden went from being untouchable to always under the microscope in every way, shape, or form. And that's kind of how we've done it. We've done it with serial killers now, so that if you want to be famous, you're a serial killer. You go in, you got people that are shooting up schools. And every time these stories come on, one of the things that comes up in our household is if you just stop giving these people's names out, it would go away. Now, do I think serial killers would leave the world and never pop up again? No, but I think that they would recede to a point that it wouldn't, because really it's just too common now.
And we do have, mass media, the instant communication, the on-demand for information. The wildfire spreads with a lot less gasoline than it did back then. But, as we see sort of later in the season, there is always this sort of, what do they call it? The ghost network? It's sort of like there's always this word of mouth, right? Because they wind up getting funding eventually, right? When a lot of the show after the first episode, very much let's introduce you to the characters. Let's use this really kick-ass, really creative opening sequence to kind of set the tone. Sort of in a giant analogy of what kind of like most of the beginning half of the season is about. We didn't talk about the opening as far as the title sequence, which I think is one of the most brilliant title sequences for a show like this. These are the kind of title sequences that I really sort of regret that Netflix ever came up with that skip intro button. It's sort of like the kind of the art and the sort of like really the meticulous choosing of the kinds of images that wind up flashing around in there. To be able to just give people the option to be like, oh, fuck that. It's like, come on, that you need. I always find out it's like a palate cleanser between episodes. You know what I mean? Like, I want the theme song. I want to ease out of the sickness I just saw in the last one.
When you binge watch, though, after about the 6th episode, it's like, okay, skip that shit.
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
That's right. That the opening title sequence is such a. I don't know. It really kind of puts you into that mindset of it kind of eases you down, but at the same time, it piques the interest. What's coming up next? Who are they? Especially when you have that microphone in your face at the very end. It's like, who are they going to talk to next, or what will be said next? So it is a good title sequence. However, it's got to go.
It is on the long side, it's the tedium of being a detective and having to go through the details over and over and over again. And I think if you watch it, doesn't the tape recorder, the models sort of gets newer and newer during the course of the whole thing? Like first it's reel to reel, and by the end of it, it's a different model. But that could just be me. I know that happens over the course of the season. They constantly get better tech.
And I found an interesting story about why that happened too, and I'll let that go when we get to that. But,
nice! I like it. See, we're kind of seeding. We're giving you all out there some what they call foreshadowing. We're setting up some mind traps for you later.
Teasers.
Yeah.
Teasers,
very much in the way that I think Debbie is in her general approach to life. Her sort of meeting with Holden in the bar is, I think, one of my favorite meet cutes ever. There's a lot of favorites for this show. This show pulls a lot of stuff to the top. Like, that's a tropey thing, but it was really well done. She's a very interesting character from the minute we meet her. What kind of vibes do you guys get from Debbie?
Well, she's like, she keeps like poking at him. She just keeps poking Holden, like, why didn't you think about this? Why didn't you think about this? And she's not that much younger than him. She's like she's 24, and what do they say he is? Like 28 or something?
He's
29. Okay. But she just keeps poking him, like, why haven't you thought about this? You're supposed to be the smart guy in the FBI. Why don't go look at this? Go look at this. And she just like keeps pushing him in these different directions. And I love that. I love that about her.
I think she is responsible for who he becomes, to be honest with you. But
oh wow.
Yeah, she is more intelligent than what anybody would realize. And that first interaction she has with him, it's almost like she's it's like there's like a struggle for dominance between the two, and they're using that psychological ability. You know, she's pushing what she knows versus what he knows, and then she plays it off of him, and then he plays it back off of her. So it's almost like a mental dominance that they're working towards, and that attraction, I think, is what really kind of draws them in. It all the way to the point where she finally wins, and she just says, "All right, screw it," grabs his tie and pulls him out on the dance floor. That's pretty much her saying, "All right, I got you. You're mine."
She played with him for a while, then she landed her fish. I think she's a really good example of, you know, you can get myopic when you're down into something to the point where you can't see outside of what you're really trying to either prove or disprove. And she gives him that overhead vision that's out of the fog of war and helps him advance his ideas, clean up his ideas, and sort of keep redirecting him. You know, I mean, she sort of brings his stream back around when he starts to veer, or he gets so set on one thing that he can't see all the other things around him. And I think she acts as a good anchoring force and a good sort of vision assistant on what he's trying to develop.
You can't see the picture from inside the frame, and she's definitely looking at it from outside that frame.
Yeah.
And how they have such similar interests and the ability to talk about, you know, the psychology of things, yet they're so polar opposite. You know, when we first see his apartment, it's very sterile, it's very stark, it's very simple, and he goes to her place and, like, the bed's unmade, it's got, like, books that have probably been collected and snowballed through the families, and there's got, like, a library of dusty books. It's, like, the perfect, like, the hippie going out with an FBI agent, even to the point where she's like, "Here, you're gonna have to hit the bong if you want to hit this later on." You know what I mean? And he's like, "Are you a honey trap?" Like he's so naive. Like, I've heard about this shit. I've heard they send hot chicks to try to get dudes to smoke, and then I'm gonna get arrested. And she's like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" And I would totally, like, I would love a Debbie. I would love to meet Debbie. Good God. She reminds me of Woody Harrelson's wife as well in True Detective. So now I'm in this mode where I feel like the whole podcast I'm going to be pointing out all the parallels I find to True Detective. I really think this season, already thinking about it in those terms, is playing out as a season where somebody else guest directed and guest wrote all the episodes. It's like, all right, do True Detective, but do your style. This is the David Finch season of True Detective.
I like, though, that the parallels between these two people, Debbie and Ford, just for the simple fact that you're seeing a organized. The parallel is between the types of crime, you know, the disorganized versus the organized. And these two characters are like, they demonstrate that organized versus disorganized so well. And the more they dive into it, the more you kind of see how that plays in. But yeah, it's crazy how these two people, they put these two characters together, and it really, just the way they act, just the way their lifestyles are and how they come together, it kind of shows exactly what's going on in his head. You can almost see what's going on in his head through the episodes based on their relationship.
Yeah. He likes the challenge of her. You know, I mean, like, his first thing was like, you know, you're supposed to be easier than this. You know what I mean? I did not get the idea that you were going to be a bookworm and that you were going to be. Yeah, the jumpsuit. He thought it was like a whole, like, you know, you're some young hot chick in a jumpsuit. I'm like an FBI agent. This makes sense. And she's like, yeah, no, you don't know about this theory? Like, what, are you kidding me? You know, it's you can kind of see, I think, and then when Tench comes in, you have basically these sort of like three different perspectives, because Tench is kind of like him a couple years down the road with the wife and kids, and it kind of shows if you're not with that right combination of those, you're not exactly the happiest of people. You know what I mean? You put on a good face and you go into your routine of teaching class, right? Because he's sort of a bridge. He's partly in that old mentality. You know, his class is always the same. He's like, it's like motive, opportunity, and I don't know what the third one was, even though I just watched the third.
Yeah, all that. Yeah, but I didn't get that from Tench. I didn't see that aspect from Tench at all. What I saw from Tench was more like what we see now of that in-betweeners between millennials and Generation Xers types. That the ones that are just on the bridge, they want to be cutting edge, but at the same time, they don't have the youth to be cutting edge.
Yeah.
He's feeling that. He it's like he knows that, and he's almost feeling like he's almost discouraged by the fact, because there's a part in there where you see them out on the road, and they're teaching a class. Well, Mr. Young Ford is getting all philosophical with these guys, and he cracks a joke to lighten the mood. You know, Tench cracks the joke to lighten the mood, because these guys don't get the whole idea of being cutting edge and young and youthful and excited. And no, we're not excited about that. We see the shit. Hey, you're just talking.
Yeah.
Now, there are some things I want to point out about both Holden and Debbie, but I kind of feel like I want to wait at least till we start talking about episode 2 or 3, because I don't want it to taint anybody who might be watching the show for the first time and listening to us as they go through the episodes. But just remind me if I don't get to anything that you guys feel like, oh yeah, this must be what he was talking about. But there are just some things about the way Holden is portrayed at the beginning, the way Debbie is portrayed at the beginning, the way Tench is portrayed when we first meet them, and how all of them sort of go on evolutions throughout the show. But right away, and maybe again it's because I've watched the whole season, but there are things in this episode even that I'm kind of like, I wonder if this theory, and it's something that doesn't get answered by the end of the season, so I don't know if it necessarily would be spoilery to talk about it now, but I just wonder if we're supposed to so quickly see that Holden could very easily be one of the people that the Mindhunters are hunting. You know, like he's got the potential to be somebody like, but like
waiting for that myself.
And I see it in episode 1, maybe because it's multiple viewings, but I think even in the way they portray his apartment, like that level of hyper organization. And then he doesn't even have a TV or a radio. You know, he like sits and listens to classic music and just looks out the window. That is like some fucking Rust Cole, Matthew McConaughey, True Detective, like good guy but fucked up good guy shit right there. You know what I mean? Like, of course you're hunting serial killers. You're like Dexter, just not the serial killer version of Dexter. You're like the good cop version of Dexter.
Yeah.
That parallel is definitely there. That's kind of where I was going with that whole organized versus organized.
No,
it's there. All the trademarks of being a serial murderer, serial killer are there. Just that he's using that, and I think that's part of the thing that plays into his ability to get on the level.
Yeah,
I think you might later on, or at least I it's just an assumption, but you might see that it's this mindset, but the non-broken version is able to track its like twin, because the serial killer, there's always that thing that set them down that path. That's the thing that they keep searching out, the thing that set them there. And he just never got that catalyst that sent him.
I think he may have. I think we just miss it. And mainly, I'm talking about when they bring up, where are you from?
Yeah. I was gonna say now, it definitely comes from some stuff that we haven't seen, stuff that happened before the season even started, and I think it gets exacerbated by things that happen over the course of this season. I don't know if there's a lot left to talk about with episode 1 here before we move on to episode 2. Is there anything as far as, do you remember after the first episode, your feeling of, was it, I mean, we already heard that people are binging it, but like, was your expectation met or changed from how you thought about it when you saw the trailer and wanted to get into it? Like, by the end of the first episode, how were you feeling about watching the rest of the show? And
I was
Todd
annoyed because now I had to. Because for me, it's just always been so easy. I go, no, it's a cop procedural show. I don't have to watch this. I'm not into it. It's not my thing. But by the end of episode 1, it was like, well, now I got to watch the next one. And the one after that, and then it just never lets up, So I would say annoyed was my overall general feeling when the first episode ended.
I was just hoping we got more. Like, I wanted to know more. I just kept wanting to know each episode. I just wanted more. So that's why I kept watching it. And then now at the end of the first season, after watching it, I'm like, thank goodness we're season 2, because I just want more.
Yeah.
Give me more. There's so much more to be explored.
CJ?
Yeah, after linking everything kind of together, I am very into the science aspect of it, like I was saying earlier. So seeing where that was going to go, I had to see how they're going to play that out, how they're going to develop that. And then, of course, seeing David Berkowitz brought up earlier in the show, I wanted to see if, how the real life serial killer aspect comes into it, because you notice pretty early on that there's a lot of true to life things that are being done. I mean, using Berkowitz, for example, and Son of Sam killings and all that kind of stuff, for example, using that, and then obviously with the fictional aspect of Debbie and everything else coming along with it, I wanted to see how they meshed that all together.
Now
I had to watch the next. I just had to go on.
Now, I do find that this is one of those shows that when you binge it, the episodes do start to kind of blur together, and I think that's part of because of the style and the feel. It feels like it's one 10-hour movie. Was the first episode where we did see they were teaching a class on the road, and this one cop is like, oh yeah, well, what about this? This happened, and this guy attacked this guy, and he murdered this woman, and he shoved a broom handle up her ass. What does that mean? And they were like, we don't. Is that the next episode? All right, because I know that's early.
At the beginning of beginning of episode 2. Yeah.
So episode 1 is kind of like the most, the least Mindhunter-y episode I guess we get to see. It's the episode before all the real meat starts to come down the road. So after that huge spoiler I just dropped there, go watch episode 2 and come back and join us. Well, we'll be discussing episode 2, but I think this comes to conclusion for our episode 1 initial phase of our investigation here. It's been a pleasure being Dave the Klone, and I guess semi half in the bag directing this rambly, shambly recap of episode 1 of the first season here. Does anybody have anything to plug? Let's go around the horn here. TW, since you got introduced last, why don't you tell us first what you got going on, what you want people to go find on the internet and learn about you.
Just had a new book come out, Dead Snapshot Estacada. It just dropped on May 1st, so I think that's book number 36 or 37. So
all right, there, Jack Nicholson from As Good as It Gets. Very cool. Everybody go check those out. It's a zombie series that unlike any other, and we are always going to be kind of keeping you abreast of the developments in the ongoing series of the Dead novels. And you can always hear Mr. TW on Tangent City as Dr. Paulson. CJ, what's going on? Tell us a little bit about your world of the internet.
Well, over at Saloon 7 Studios, we've been kicking off our year 2 of Grit and Grace TV. So we've been excited about that. We put out a giveaway. We're going to be giving away some pretty cool swag, some year commemorative T-shirts, things like that. Sweet. So we're pretty happy about that. So you can check everything out that we're doing over at gritandgracetv.com.
All right, and Miss Earp, I know we have some stuff going on at the Hollow9ine Network. What do you got going on as well in your world?
Okay, so I've got a few podcasts going to be dropping soon, mostly on 10 Minutes of Purgatory. Then I also am part of the new blog on the network it's all about comics. So it's called Comic Crush 9.
Yes.
Come and check us out. We've got the intro up right now, and I haven't started writing this first month, but I'm in charge of the first month. So by the end of May, there'll be the first one coming out. It'll be about my obsession with Lazarus. So if you haven't read that, then it'll be about that.
You'll have time to get schooled. And
Yes.
we've got a whole bunch of new episodes dropping, and we have our response to Infinity War coming up that has been thoroughly treaded territory by the folks over on Marvel vs. DC, who have already been knee-deep in an MCU rewatch once the Infinity War was here. And there have been some pieces from other folks in the network. It's going to be a nice, cool, celebration episode, celebrating the pain of Thanos 2020, #We Can Lose Half. So come back and check us out here on the Mindhunter podcast, and check out all the other cool stuff we got going on at the Hollow9ine Network. You can always hear about that over at the Terra Firma Artists Union as well. David Klone saying, see you at our next meeting.
You've been listening to the Hollow9ine Network, bringing you the very best in fan-made media. That's the word hollow, the number 9, I-N-E. Now broadcasting from our new home on the web, Hollow9ine.com, where you can find info on all of our awesome programming as well as the team behind the shows. Leave us your feedback, join in the conversation, and be a part of the action. Find the Hollow9ine Network on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. Email us at info@hollow9.com or at hollow9podcast@gmail.com. Join in the fun. Hollow9ine.